The second criminal element or element of a crime that we'll discuss is the mental state. In most criminal offenses, this will be the defining element, as it will determine the seriousness of the offense. We'll use homicide examples often enough, even though they're not very common offenses. When you think about the different levels of homicide or criminal homicide that we have in Texas, murder, manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, they all have the possibility, anyway, for the same action. You could accomplish all three of those with a firearm, or all three of those with a knife, or all three of those with a poison or something along those lines. And they all three produce the same result. So what defines the seriousness of those offenses? What makes murder first degree versus manslaughter a second degree? And the answer is the mental state. What level of intent did the offender have? And I use that word intent, but we're going to try to stay away from that. We're going to try to use the phrase mental state. Intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, and with criminal negligence are the four types of mental state in Texas. So by using the phrase intent to refer to the mens rea, you're only talking about one type of mental state. So we're going to use the phrase mental state or mens rea. The first type is generally the most obvious to most people. Intentionally. The actor acts intentionally when he has a conscious objective to engage in the conduct or to produce the result. Somebody pulls a gun on another person and demands money, intentionally robs that person. Knowingly is a type of mental state that is often seen in the criminal statutes along with intentionally. They'll use the phrase intentionally and or knowingly. But it's a little different. It's a little lesser than intentionally. Typically somebody acts knowingly when they don't necessarily intend to engage in the action or produce the result, but they are aware of the circumstances surrounding their conduct. They are aware of the likelihood that a particular result will be produced. And I'll give you a really quick example. You can Google, and this is just from a Wikipedia article, the death of Gregory Glen Biggs. In October of 2001, a woman in Fort Worth, Texas, struck and eventually led to the death of Greg Biggs, who was homeless at the time. The woman driving the car was intoxicated. She had alcohol, marijuana, ecstasy, a little bit of everything, and she hit this man in the street, and he became lodged in her windshield in the car. She drove home. She left him stuck in the windshield. She parked her car in the garage. She didn't notify the police. She didn't seek any kind of medical attention. She was a nurse's aide, but did nothing or a former nurse's aide, but she did nothing to help him. He eventually died from his injuries, however many hours later. He was still stuck in the windshield when he died. She called, after his death, she called a friend. He helped her remove the body, took it to a park, and left the body in a park. The woman eventually was caught because she had been heard or reported talking and laughing about the offense with a friend or at a party or something along those lines. When we look at this example, it's one of my favorite examples to use with knowingly, because she didn't intend, probably didn't intend to hit the man versus intending to kill him. So we wouldn't be able to use a statute that said she intentionally caused his death. That gets a little tricky. But when we talk about knowingly, and in this circumstance, if we look at her behavior and her knowledge, is she aware that the result is likely to be produced? Is she reasonably certain that the cause or the result is going to be produced? In this case, his death. And we would say yes, if he needed medical attention, if he's stuck in her windshield, if she closes the garage door and waits long enough, that he will die. So in this particular instance, if she was arrested at the scene of the offense, and let's assume that he had died from the vehicle impact, it would most likely be charged under the offense of intoxication manslaughter, which is a second-degree felony. Under this offense, she was charged with intentionally or knowingly causing his death, which is a first-degree offense, a first-degree felony under the murder statute. The interesting thing about this story by itself is that there was multiple testimony at this woman's trial that anybody on the Fort Worth Fire Department, most of the experts agreed that he would have survived had he received medical attention. So instead of facing a manslaughter charge, an intoxication manslaughter charge, or what she was eventually convicted of, the first-degree murder charge, she most likely would have been charged with intoxication assault because she would not have produced his death, and that would have been a third-degree felony. So instead of a maximum of 10 years, she is currently serving something like a 50-year sentence. So I use that as an example of knowingly. The next mental state is reckless. A person acts recklessly when he is aware of but consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that either circumstances exist or that a result is possible or a result is likely to occur. We can think about recklessness on our highways. If you're driving too fast on a wet road or too fast in the snow or the icy conditions, we would say that you would be aware of that, and you would be reckless if you produced some sort of result. Most people act with recklessness, don't ever produce a result, so their conduct is never criminalized or they're never brought to the attention of authorities. In a homicide case, manslaughter is a offense in which you recklessly cause the death of another person. So let's say if you fire a gun into a crowd of people without intending to shoot anybody, we would say that would be knowing behavior. If you shoot into a crowd of people, you are aware of your actions and that the likelihood of that your actions are going to produce a result, in this case being the death of an individual, we would call that knowingly. So as an example of recklessly, let's suppose that you fire your gun into the air. We can think of some real-world examples. There was a case in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of a woman who was shot when a .50 caliber bullet came through the roof of her recreational vehicle. It would be hard to prove in a courtroom that the person who fired that gun did so knowingly, that the result was a likely outcome. But we can say that they acted recklessly. They were aware of their conduct and they ignored an unjustifiable risk when they fired that gun. The last example will be criminal negligence. Criminal negligence is a lesser mental state than reckless. It exists when an actor ought to be aware of a substantial or unjustifiable risk, but for one reason or another is not. And generally it only involves negligence when the failure to perceive a risk is a gross deviation from the standard of care an ordinary person would exercise. So we would things that produce from maybe a behavior such as texting and driving, where you're not aware of how fast you are going, you're not aware of running a red light or a stop sign, that could be negligent. Rather than reckless, disregarding it, you were not aware of when an ordinary person would have been. So those are the four types of mental state in Texas: intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence.